Imagine something that costs a few $1,000s wiping out millions of dollars worth of ammunition in a single night. That is exactly what happened near Belgorod on the night of June 8th, not at the front, but deep in the Russian rear, in the one place Moscow felt safest. The blast was enormous. For hours, whatever had been stored in that depot kept detonating wave after wave until the sky above the forest turned black. But the number that truly frightens Russia's generals is a completely different one. It has nothing to do with shells and everything to do with trucks with kilometers and with time. Because what burned that night was not simply a depot. It was a single knot in the system that keeps Russian artillery alive. And that one knot explains why a war decided for years by sheer mass could suddenly tip on a very simple piece of arithmetic. To understand what really happened here, we need to step back from the front line for a moment and look at the map. Belgorod is no ordinary Russian city. It sits barely 40 kilometers behind the border on the upper reaches of the Donets. And it was not built there by accident. Back in 1596, Belgorod was founded as a border fortress, a stone bolt against attacks from the south. For centuries, this city was a shield. In this war, it has become something else entirely, a supply depot. Because Belgorod sits on one of the oldest links between Russia and Ukraine, the Moscow-Kharkiv Railway. Trade once flowed along that line. Today, steel flows along it. Shells, propellant charges, rockets, everything the Russian northern front devours rolls in by rail from deep inside the country, gets unloaded here, and on the final leg is carried by truck to the guns. A city as a stomach digesting the war and pressing it forward. And that is exactly why this stomach was supposed to be untouchable. In May 2024, Russia launched an offensive in northern Ukraine toward Kharkiv and the small town of Vovchansk just across the border. President Vladimir Putin named the goal openly a buffer zone, a security zone, a literally sanitary zone to protect Belgorod from Ukrainian shelling. Capture Kharkiv. That was not on the agenda, he said, just a protective belt. That idea proved stubborn. As late as the end of December 2025, Russia's chief of the general staff, Valery Gerasimov, ordered his troops to keep expanding the buffer zones in the Sumy and Kharkiv regions explicitly to protect the border regions of Kursk and Belgorod. For more than a year and a half, the entire purpose of this offensive was a single promise to Russia's own population. At home, it stays quiet. Hold that thought for a moment. Russia sent thousands of soldiers deep into Ukraine and bled them at Vovchansk to create a zone meant to protect Belgorod. And the geography makes that link almost physical. Vovchansk, the hottest flashpoint of this northern front, sits barely more than an hour's drive from Belgorod. Whatever is stored in the Belgorod region is not bound for some distant front. It is the fuel for the guns that fire every single day right there just across the border. Belgorod and this front are not a separate rear and battlefield. They are one continuous organism. The depot here, the gun barrel, they're a short road in between. Hit the depot and you hit the barrel, just one step earlier in the place no one expects. And then on the night of June 8th, 2026, black smoke rose over a patch of forest near the village of Belovskoye, not far from the city of Belgorod. Minutes later, an explosion tore through the silence, followed by hours of secondary detonations. The buffer zone, designed as a shield, had not caught the blow. It had simply flown over it and struck deep into the heart of the rear it was supposed to protect. Search for Belovskoye on a map, and you find an unremarkable village. A little over 3,000 residents, 34 streets fields, all around a stretch of forest. Nothing that looks like a strategic target. But wars are rarely decided where things look spectacular. They are decided where the threads come together. And in that forest, they came together. Because a depot like this is not an end in itself. It is a transshipment point, the place where the heavy rail freight from deep inside Russia pauses briefly before being broken down into smaller loads and driven forward. The closer that depot sits to the front, the shorter the routes, the higher the tempo, the denser the fire. It is the flywheel that keeps the whole system spinning. Take it out and everything keeps turning for a while, but it loses speed. And that is exactly what happened that night. Now let us look at what we actually know about that night, and just as important, what we do not. According to the Ukrainian newspaper Ukrainska Pravda, a powerful explosion was reported near Belgorod on June 8th. The regional emergency headquarters itself spoke of a detonation that had damaged homes and an office building in the village of Belovskoye. According to the agency RBC Ukraine, the first explosion was followed by numerous secondary detonations, the unmistakable signature of a burning ammunition depot. 3 apartment buildings and more than 20 private homes were damaged. Windows, shattered roofs, and facades failed against the blast wave. The news outlet Ukrinform reported that 5 women suffered concussions from the shockwave. Russian authorities closed several roads around the site because the munitions kept detonating for hours. And residents, according to several Ukrainian outlets, later found shell fragments and pieces of ammunition on their properties, a quiet testament to what had been stored in that forest. And here comes the crucial point, the one where I stay honest. There is, to this day, no official Russian confirmation of the cause. In local telegram channels, several versions circulated from a Russian glide bomb that fell short to a deliberate Ukrainian drone strike. But analysts from the monitoring group PEPL and the investigative project Astra point to a telling detail. Black smoke rose from the forest before the big explosion. That suggests a fire broke out first, triggered by a drone hit, and that the detonation of the depot followed. Satellite imagery. Astra says suggests soldiers may also have been wounded or killed. That is not confirmed, and I will not sell it to you as fact. According to unverified reports, the depot may even have held components for S-400 air defense systems or Iskander missiles. That, too, is unverified. I will treat it as what it is, an indication, not proof. How great the damage truly was can only be estimated from the outside. The fact that the secondary detonations lasted hours, not minutes, points to a substantial quantity of stored munitions. But any specific tonnage figure drifting around the internet right now is an extrapolation, not a measurement. I would rather give you no number than an invented one. What can be said with confidence? This strike does not stand alone. It is part of a pattern. In September 2025, Ukrainian HIMARS artillery hit the Belgorod thermal power plant and knocked out power across the entire city. In April 2026, a Ukrainian drone destroyed an ammunition depot belonging to Russia's specialist Rubicon unit at Vovchansk, also in the Belgorod region near Vovchansk. And on the very same night of June 8th that Belovskoye burned Ukrainian drones struck other targets deep inside Russia, among them an oil terminal at Novorossiysk, hundreds of kilometers away. This is no lucky hit. It is a campaign that systematically attacks the depth. Belovskoye is its latest and one of its heaviest points. It is also worth noting where this depot stood in a patch of forest right next to an inhabited village. That is no accident. Storing ammunition near civilians and under tree cover is an attempt to hide it from reconnaissance and attack, and at the same time, a tacit admission that there is barely a truly safe place left in the Russian rear. But forests hide nothing from satellites anymore. Russian positions in the Belovskoye area, according to the PEPL analysts, were visible on publicly available mapping services and on satellite imagery. What is visible can be found, and what can be found can be hit. And notice what did not happen here, Kyiv, as so often has not officially claimed the strike. That is not a sign of weakness. It is method. Whoever confirms nothing forces the enemy to interpret every shadow, every fire, every empty road himself, and to always assume the worst. Elop for. Mechanisms are the exclusive core. And now we come to the part most videos about explosions like this leave out. Not the question, how loud was it? But what does it mean? Let us start with an uncomfortable truth, uncomfortable for anyone who thinks this war is a duel of wonder weapons. Russia's greatest advantage was never technology. It was mass. In Soviet and in Russian military doctrine, artillery is the god of war. It is not the elegant strike that decides, but the weight of fire, more barrels, more shells, a hail of steel that grinds down the Ukrainian lines day and night. Just how large that advantage was Ukrainian Defense Minister Rustem Umerov spelled out openly in early 2024. On some sectors of the front, he said Russia fired 5 to 10 times as many shells as Ukrainian forces. At the worst point of Ukraine's ammunition shortage, the ratio was steeper still in places. That is the machine that drives Russian offensives. It buys ground not with cleverness, but with fire. But this machine has a preconditions almost no one talks about. A shell does not just have to be produced, it also has to arrive. And here the war suddenly becomes very physical. A 152-millimeter shell weighs about 40 kilograms. A battery in combat devours such shells by the hundreds a day. Scale that across an entire front sector, and you are not talking about a few crates on a pickup. You are talking about thousands of tons of steel that have to be moved every single day from the factory by rail into a depot and from there to the guns. The railway carries that mass over long distances, but the railway does not end at the front. Rails are rigid. They lead to stations, and stations do not sit in the trenches. Somewhere the load has to switch from rail to road. That place is the transshipment depot, a depot like Belovskoye. From there, the truck takes the final leg, and the truck is the bottleneck of the entire system. And you cannot simply build that bottleneck away. Rail networks take decades to grow. You do not lay a new line to the front overnight, least of all under fire. The last dozen kilometers to the gun always belong to the road and the truck that is no Russian, failing that is the nature of military logistics. Which is exactly why the few transfer points where rail meets road are so valuable. There are not many of them, and every single one is a fat, immovable target. Let us work it through roughly but honestly. A supply truck shuttling from a depot near the border to the firing positions has a short loop load drive up, unload, return, start over. Over a short distance, it manages several such runs a day. Every single run is firepower that arrives at the front. Many trucks, many runs, dense fire. Now destroy that forward depot. Russia still has the shells in the factories in the big depots deep in the rear. Not a single round was lost in production. But the transshipment point near the front is gone. So resupply now has to come from a depot that lies farther back, safer from drones, yes, but also considerably farther away. And this is the point where the arithmetic tips. Move that depot back by just 50 kilometers, and the truck's journey doubles there and back. Double the distance, and you have the number of runs a truck manages in a day. Have the number of runs, and you have at the core the quantity of shells that reaches the barrels up front. 2 trips become 1. A full rate of fire becomes rationing. Let us make it concrete. If the depot sits 25 kilometers behind the guns, a truck on that short loop might manage 4 runs a day. Push the depot back to 50 kilometers, and the loop becomes double the distance, and 4 runs become 2. The same truck, the same driver, the same load per trip, but only half the throughput. To make that up, Russia would have to throw twice as many trucks, twice as many drivers, and twice as much fuel onto the same road in the middle of a war where all of that is already scarce. If it cannot, the fire drops. That is how simple and how unforgiving this arithmetic is. Read that thought twice because it is the key to everything. Russia does not have to make a single shell fewer. The factories run unchanged. Deliveries from North Korea keep arriving, and yet the fire at the front falls. Not because ammunition is missing, but because it no longer reaches the muzzle of the gun in time. And here lies an irony that must sting Moscow especially. Russia has massively increased its shell volume lately through its own production and through millions of rounds from North Korea. But more mass does not shrink the bottleneck. It widens it. The more tons that have to move from rail to road each day, the more important every single transfer point becomes, and the more devastating it is when one fails. Russia is caught in a trap. Concentrate the ammunition in big depots near the border, and it is efficiently distributed but vulnerable. Spread it across many small, deep depots, and it is safer, but sluggish and slow. There is no option that offers both at once, and it is precisely into that gap that every Ukrainian drone aims. That is the real blow of this night. You cannot stop a factory with a drone. It sits too deep inside the country, too well protected, too large. Russia produces millions of shells a year. A burning depot changes nothing about that. But a drone can hit the one point where dead stockpile actually becomes fire, the handover from rail to road. And that point is vulnerable like almost no other in the entire system. And this is not theory. It has already happened. By December 2024, Russia's artillery advantage had shrunk from at least 5-1 to roughly 1.5-1. Western officials told the broadcaster Sky News the reasons, production and transport problems, Western deliveries to Ukraine, and explicitly Ukrainian drone strikes on ammunition depots. In other words, this very method has already more than halved Russia's fire superiority once before. Belovskoye is not the start of this idea. It is its logical continuation, this time not just anywhere, but on the soil of the city that was supposed to protect the whole thing. Let us call the principle by its name. It is the ancient logic of taking the fire out from under the boiling pot rather than trying to pour the water out. Ukraine does not duel shell for shell in the trench where Russia holds the advantage. It attacks one level deeper the logistics that make the duel possible in the first place. You do not have to catch the hail of steel, you just have to make sure it is not reloaded, and the balance of that trade is breathtakingly one-sided. On one side, a strike drone whose cost, depending on the type, runs in the low 4 to 5 figure range. On the other, a depot full of ammunition worth many millions and far more important than the burned material, a hole in the supply system that cannot be plugged overnight. No economic model in the world justifies that trade for Moscow. Ukraine pays in cents and collects in tons. It is worth lingering on that trade for a moment because it inverts the logic of the entire war. For years, Russia's calculus was simple. We have more men, more barrels, more shells, so we win the war of attrition. A cheap drone that erases an expensive depot flips that calculus around. Suddenly, it is Russia losing on the expensive scale and Ukraine striking on the cheap one. And behind that drone stands not luck, but a system reconnaissance finds the depot a drone, flies in a single hit, sets off the chain reaction. Find, fix, finish the same loop with which armies hunt tanks applied to the nervous system of resupply. And the more often that loop succeeds, the more it shifts not just a battle, but the economics of the whole war. There is a second, equally uncomfortable lesson from this night. Belovskoye lies about 40 kilometers behind the border in the middle of one of the most heavily defended regions in Russia. The fact that a drone could penetrate that deep and strike a known fixed depot says something about the gaps in Russian air defense. Point defense systems like Pantsir or Tor are notoriously unreliable against low, slow-flying drones. They are built for fast missiles and aircraft, not for small engines that creep past radar and electronic surveillance close to the ground. If that holds true, then it is not just one depot that is the problem. Then every depot at this depth is a problem. And that problem grows more urgent with every passing week. A drone that penetrates 40 kilometers deep forces Russia to shield not just the front, but hundreds of kilometers of its own rear without gaps, every station, every depot, every transfer point. But air defense is expensive and finite. You cannot protect everything at once. Push the systems to the rear to cover the depots, and they are missing at the front. Leave them forward, and the rear stays open. It is the same trap as with the ammunition itself, only one level higher. Too much to protect too little to be strong everywhere. An enemy striking for a few $1,000s forces a great power to defend everywhere at once at a cost in the millions. Over time, that arithmetic does not favor the rich. It favors the frugal. So what does this mean for the weeks ahead? Let us play out the three paths now open to Russia. First, Russia pulls its depots deeper into the rear out of range of the common drones. That is safer, but it pays for that safety with longer routes, and therefore inevitably with thinner fire at the front. Second, Russia leaves the depots where they are and tries to protect them better with more air defense, with electronic warfare, with camouflage and bunkers. That is possible. But it is slow expensive and never airtight, and every gap is an open invitation for the next drone. Third, Russia gives up the forward transshipment depot altogether and loads the ammunition straight from train to truck with no meaningful buffer stock. That avoids the big rewarding target, but it creates an enormous bottleneck in time. With no buffer, every delayed train, every blocked station, every severed stretch of track turns immediately into missing fire at the front. Here is my bet. Russia will take a mix of the first and third paths, shift depots back, and lean harder on direct transfer. Both come down to the same thing: more time between the factory and the gun. And that is why I expect Russian artillery fire to fall noticeably on the Vovchansk and northern Kharkiv axis of all places over the coming 1 to 2 weeks. Not because Russia has run out of shells, but because it cannot move them forward fast enough, a local shell famine in the middle of an offensive that was meant to seize that very region. That is the bitter punchline. The buffer zone meant to protect Belgorod could now itself be left short of fire. A word on the timing effects like this do not show up the next morning. For a day or two, the batteries live off what is already up front. The shortage only comes once that forward stock is used up, and resupply from greater depth does not flow at the old tempo. That is why the window is 1 to 2 weeks, not sooner and not months from now. Anyone expecting to see an effect the day after the fireball is looking too early. And now the most important sentence in this video, the condition under which I am wrong. If Russian fire on this sector does not measurably drop over the next 2 to 3 weeks, if Russian assault attacks at Vovchansk keep rolling at the same tempo as before, then my thesis was wrong. Then Belovskoye was either less central than it looks today, or Russia had a second depot in range all along that filled the gap almost immediately. That is the beauty of a prediction about a mechanism rather than a date it can be checked by you against the real front over the coming weeks. Let me lay out where the limits of my certainty lie. That this strike happened is documented. That a drone is the most likely cause rests on the analysis of the smoke pattern, not on a confession. And the logistics arithmetic I have shown you is a model, not a speedometer. Reality has more variables than 50 kilometers and a truck. But this model has worked once before in this war demonstrably all the way down into the statistics. And that is exactly why this night weighs heavier than the fireball you see in the videos. If I am right, the sign will not be a second fireball. It will be silence. fewer impacts on the line at Vovchansk, Russian batteries forced to ration, an assault that fails to come. Watch closely for that absence of noise in the coming weeks, because that and not the fire of this night is where it will be decided whether a few $1,000s just dismantled the fire superiority of a great power. Subscribe to War Room Insights. We do not sell narratives here, we decode them. And if this breakdown changed how you see the war, share it with someone who still thinks this fight is being decided by shells alone.